I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to the Vietnam Veterans News Podcast. News of interest about Vietnam veterans from a Vietnam veteran. Now here's your host, Mac Payne.
This is Mac Payne here with episode 1779 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. News about the Vietnam War and the brave veterans who served there, as told to you by yours truly, a Vietnam veteran. In this episode, I'm going to talk about the brave Alaska Native Vietnam veterans. Back in episode 1643 of this podcast, I put out some information about Alaska Native Vietnam veterans having trouble getting their 160 acres of land that was promised to them back in Washington, D.C. Believe it or not, they ran into some problems. Imagine that, dealing with the government, and you run into a few problems. The problems these Alaska Native Vietnam veterans ran into was you had to claim your land in person at a specific time. Many of these veterans just happened to be over in Vietnam serving their country in war at the time, and they got cut out of receiving their land. Finally, they decided to try and do something about it. Back in March of 2019, President Trump signed into law the John D. Dingell Jr. Conservation Management and Recreation Act. One of the things that act did was to make Alaska Natives eligible to claim 160 acres of public land in Alaska. It sounded real good at the signing ceremony, but unfortunately, there always seems to be a problem in the process. Episode 1643 was titled, Alaska Native Vietnam Vets to Get Land, Maybe. In this episode, I have an update for you, and things are looking better for the Alaska Native Vietnam veterans. Thank goodness. Dan Sullivan, who is one of the senators from the great state of Alaska, put out a PR about new developments that are going to hopefully make it possible for the Alaska Native Vietnam veterans to receive their 160 acres. I'm going to share that story with you and give you some links afterwards where if you are an Alaska Native Vietnam vet, you can go there and find out more about claiming your land. There will be 3 links in the show notes for this podcast episode over at the podcast website, vietnamveterannews.com, where you can check them out. I encourage you to go over there. Whether you are an Alaska Native Vietnam vet or if you know one of these people, I recommend they go to this site and find out about this offer. The first link in there will be the Bureau of Land Management website. It has an article in there, eligible Alaska Native veterans can get up to 160 acres of federal land. Then they list all the things you need to do. If you are a member of this group of veterans, I highly encourage you to go over there and check it out. Nothing's better than 160 acres of land. There'll also be a link in there to the BIA, Realty Tribal Service Providers, and a link to the Alaska State Court appointed personal representatives. Those are some of the things you're going to have to go through to get this land. It will be worth it so you can receive the benefits from a grateful nation. Because we are all grateful for our Vietnam veterans, wherever they came from, and we want to take care of them. Here is what Senator Dan Sullivan says in his press release. The title of it is, Alaska Native Vietnam War Era Veterans Are One Step Closer to Being Able to Apply for Land Allotments. Dateline, Washington, D.C. U.S. Senators Lisa Murkowski, Dan Sullivan, and Representative Don Young, all of Alaska, the Bureau of Land Management's announcement of proposed rules that will allow more than 1,000 Alaska Native Vietnam War-era veterans to apply to land allotments of up to 160 acres of land. This is a key step to fulfilling an important provision of the Dingell Act landmark public lands legislation that Congress passed early last year. BLM also announced the specific lands available for selection. I hope the land that is available for selection is some good land. Continuing. This is a significant action that will right an historic wrong for the Alaska Native veterans who missed the deadline for land claims because they were serving their country during the Vietnam War, said Murkowski, who shepherded the legislation as chairman of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. Finally, we can start the process of providing a measure of long overdue equity to the brave individuals who fought for the rest of us. I thank BLM for working with the state of Alaska and Alaska Native corporations to identify lands that will be available for selection. Senator Sullivan added this: after decades of effort, I am pleased to see further progress in correcting this inequity to Alaska Native Vietnam veterans. As I've said over the years, Alaska Natives and American Indians serve at higher rates than any other ethnic group in the nation, what I call a special kind of patriotism. While I know there's still work to do, I encourage all Alaska Native Vietnam veterans and their heirs to review the proposed rules and comment. I also want to thank the Bureau of Land Management for their expedited efforts to meet the timeline presented by Congress, while also ensuring maximum public participation. Senator Young added this comment: Alaska Native Vietnam veterans put their lives on the line for our nation, and for too long, the federal government fell shamefully short of making good on the promises of land allotments made to them. I am very proud that with the support of tireless Alaska Native advocates, the Alaska delegation, and the administration, we have finally rectified this injustice. These proposed rules for land selection are a critical step forward for our heroes. I am grateful to the Bureau of Land Management for working with the Alaska delegation, ANCs, and countless veterans and their advocates throughout this process. And I look forward to well-earned land finally being allotted to those brave Alaskans, said Senator Young. Hopefully, after many of these Alaska Native Vietnam veterans get their land and get set up on it, they'll have a barbecue or maybe a fish fry and invite these senators and congressmen to a cookout. Continuing with the presser. The rules announced yesterday are now open for public comment. Further information for Alaska Native veterans or their heirs can be found here. That is the link to the BLM page that will be on the show notes for this podcast episode. You know where. Over at the podcast website, VietnamVeteranNews.com. Continuing, applicants can use BLM's own line mapping tools to determine which lands they would like to apply for. To ensure all eligible veterans or their surviving heirs apply, BLM and the Bureau of Indian Affairs ask that contact information be updated with the BIA Realty Tribal Service providers. That link will also be on the website. Also, Alaska State Court-appointed personal representatives link will be on there too. I encourage everyone who might be affected by this government action to make land available to Alaska Native Vietnam veterans to please take a look at these websites and take action. You don't want to have another situation of where you say, well, I'll take care of that later. And then when you get down to actually taking care of it, they say, sorry, this offer closed out last month. You are out of luck, kid. You do not want that to happen. So please, to everyone up there in Alaska, help out your Alaska Native Vietnam veterans to get what is due them for their service to their country. That's the least we can do. I want to thank these senators and representatives for the work that they're doing. Senator Murkowski, Sullivan, and Representative Don Young, and encourage them to stay with it. Don't let up. Because sometimes things like this have a tendency to get lost in all the paperwork. So keep it up. That's the latest news. Please take advantage of it. That's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it. This is Mac Payne closing out episode 1779er of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. I also encourage you to go over to the podcast website, VietnamVeteranNews.com, right there at the top. You will see a beautiful ad about a legacy staff. It has been written that although I walk through the valley of death, I will be okay because someone's going to be there with a rod and a staff. They're going to take care of you. The staff that is in that picture and available to you is constructed with that idea in mind. It will protect you. So you might want to get one. If you want to buy one, you can get a 10% discount if you just put in the code that's right there in that ad. Don't delay. Check it out. I'll guarantee you'll like it because I have one and I treasure it greatly, and you will too. This is Mac Payne closing out episode 1779er of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. You are cordially invited to return again soon and often to listen to more of these stories that will be coming your way on this podcast. The Vietnam Veteran News.
How about that? Ain't that a mess?